Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really distinct and pretty intense way of defending Christian belief. It comes from the theologian Cornelius Van Til, and trust me, it's an approach that completely reframes the whole conversation about faith and reason. So right off the bat, you get a sense of where he's coming from. For Van Til, this isn't some polite academic debate over a cup of tea. He sees it as a spiritual war for the very nature of truth. And in this war, he argues, there are no neutral countries, no civilians. Everyone is on one side or the other. To really get a handle on how Van Til builds this case, we're going to follow along with a fictional debate that he creates. We'll walk through these 6 key stages and see just how his unique argument unfolds.
Okay, let's get into it and meet the debaters. Van Til explains his whole philosophy through this really clever dialogue between 3 symbolic characters. Each one represents a totally different way of seeing the world. And here's our cast of characters. You've got Mr. Black, the unbeliever. Then there's Mr. Gray, who represents a pretty common way of thinking, trying to use shared facts and logic. And finally, Mr. White, who is the voice for Van Til's reformed approach. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The real fight here isn't about the evidence they're going to throw around. It's about their starting points, their core assumptions. That's the real battleground. So how does this actually play out? Well, that brings us to the search for common ground. Here, Mr. Gray, with his evidence-based mainstream approach, he's up first. He's going to try and build a logical bridge over to Mr. Black, the unbeliever.
So Mr. Gray's whole strategy is to say, hey, look, we're all reasonable people. We can at least agree on some basic facts about the world and how logic works, can't we? But from the sidelines, Mr. White, who is really Van Til's mouthpiece, he's saying this is a fatal flaw. He argues that their worldviews are so fundamentally different, they can't even agree on what a fact really is.
So Mr. Gray throws out this simple, common-sense example. He's just trying to find one small piece of shared ground, in this case, the idea of free will and moral responsibility, to build his case on. It seems totally reasonable, right?
But watch what happens. It's a total backfire. Mr. Black is more than happy to agree with Mr. Gray, but he only does it so they can team up against Mr. White's view of an all-powerful God. He takes Mr. Gray's idea of freedom and uses it to bolster his own belief that humans are totally autonomous. So the attempt to build a bridge actually just made the gap even wider.
Okay, so that whole common ground approach was a bust. Now, in our next section, Mr. Gray has to switch gears. He decides to argue about God directly, pulling out some of the classic, traditional proofs for God's existence.
And he starts with a famous one, the watchmaker analogy. You've probably heard it. If you find a complex watch, you know there must have been a watchmaker. So, Mr. Gray argues, if you look at the incredible complexity of the universe, it makes God's existence highly probable. He's trying to make a logical, evidence-based case that any reasonable person ought to accept.
And this, right here, is the core of Van Til's critique. Mr. Black hears the word probable and he pounces. He says, wait a second, a God who just probably exists, that's just another possibility floating around in a universe of pure chance. That's not an absolute, sovereign God. That's just a bigger piece of the same irrational mess I already believe in.
And that's the killer point. By trying to play on Mr. Black's home field, by accepting that human reason and chance are the ultimate umpires, Mr. Gray's arguments get completely turned on their head. Instead of challenging Mr. Black's worldview, he accidentally ends up making it stronger. So, after showing how all these common methods just seem to fail, Van Til finally brings in his guy, Mr. White, to show us a radically different approach, the presuppositional method. And the subtitle says it all. This isn't about arguing to God, it's about arguing from God.
For Mr. White, everything, and I mean everything, starts here, with this one non-negotiable idea, the creator-creature distinction. The point is, you don't use supposedly neutral evidence to try and build your way up to God. No, you have to start with the reality of God as the creator to make any sense of anything at all.
So Mr. White's argument has a totally different structure. First, he doesn't try to prove God's word, he presupposes it's the ultimate authority. Second, he shows that only by starting there can you have a solid foundation for things like logic, morality, and science. And then the final step, he turns the tables. He shows that if you start where Mr. Black starts, with just chance and human autonomy, your whole worldview eventually collapses into absurdity. It makes knowledge itself impossible.
And this all leads us to the final, stark conclusion of Van Til's entire argument. It's not just that the Christian and non-Christian positions are different. They are total, all-encompassing and mutually exclusive systems of thought. There is simply no neutral ground to stand on.
And this table really lays out that massive divide. For Mr. White, reality, facts, even logic itself, they all make sense because they're grounded in God's coherent mind. For Mr. Black, reality is ultimately just chaos. So you see, they're not just disagreeing about a few facts, they're operating inside completely different frameworks for interpreting literally everything. And so, Van Til's whole explanation leaves us with this really profound question. If every system of thought, whether it's religious or not, ultimately rests on a foundational belief you can't prove from the outside, a kind of leap of faith, then how can we ever have conversations across these deep divides? It makes you question the very nature of proof itself.